Hello. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, and I'm going to break this into 3 parts. So this is really 8A, and I'm going to work on the other 2 as we go later, after this. And I'm going to talk about Chapter 8 in 3 parts so that you have the basics, and then the easy part, and then the slightly more complex part, and kind of build on things, and you don't have to figure out where that starts and ends in a single video. Excuse me, and it stretches this out a little bit. We'll do, basically it'll be Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, then you have a weekend in there to kind of get things together, and then we'll review it again at the end before we take the actual exam. So, Chapter 8 is important because it's our first one working with deductive logic, okay? And deductive logic, if the if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. And so we have to find out if there's a way or possibility that our argument, its structure, can be true premises, but a false conclusion. That's kind of what we're trying to figure out. In Chapter 8, I'm on page 250. Propositional logic is called truth function logic. And this is what we're doing now. This is the branch of logic that deals with the logical relationships among statements. And so remember what a statement is. That's a claim or a belief. It's an assertion that something is or is not the case. Okay. It also is important because a statement can be true and a statement can be false. Okay. So we have a few things here. There's a very complex argument at the bottom of page 250, top of 251, and I'm going to come back to that. And I'm going to write myself a note so I don't forget tricky arguments, and then I'm going to do page 250. Okay. So I remember to come back and do that because it's interesting. If I do it for you now, though, it's going to make your head explode. So we're just going to stay with this one. When we look at 8.1, which is connectives, how do we put the stuff together, and truth values. So we're going to learn a little bit more about how things are true or false, what that means, and how that works. Okay. So on 251, symbolic logic is logic that uses symbols to do its work. And by symbols, we mean the connectives, the things that hold these guys together. The other part of this is the variables, and the variables are the letters, and we've been playing with these back since Chapter 3, right? P and Q and R and that kind of stuff. And we're going to now see why those things are useful and how to use them to determine the validity of an argument. Okay? So far, no heads exploding, right? Good. Okay. One good thing I want to tell you before I forget, Unit 3, which is Chapters 8 and 9 for us, on arguments, has no new big words. Okay, I think because they're complex enough on their own, they don't really go on after that. We will talk a little bit about how they work. So no new big words. So the ones that were on the exam 2 that you just took will be the same ones that are on for Unit 3 for exam 3. And so make sure that you go look at my feedback on that. Make sure you have the ones correct from either the glossary or the chapters. Make sure that you're not using Google for your definitions. Okay. So I'm going to kind of walk through this table at the bottom of page 251 because we need to make sure that we understand how these work. Okay. So we have symbols. And of course they have meaning. And then I want to give you a little example. Okay. So the first symbol is the conjunction, is an and that's the ampersand. Okay, when we all use the same symbols and such to do the work, we don't have to worry about confusion. And I know then when I'm looking at your homework that you know what you're doing. Okay. So the symbol for the conjunction is an ampersand. That's that Shift 7 on your keyboard. Okay. So it's a conjunction. and say a few other things that are logically the same thing, but different words. And it's P
and Q. Put a space on either side so you can tell the difference where you are. I'm going to give you some other hints about how you write these things out, how you type these out, so that I can read your work and give you credit, okay? And so that we all look the same, because that's the big deal with logic. It's the same all the time. So P and Q, John rode the bus and Mary rode the bus, okay? The next one is a little b, lowercase v. That's it. Nothing special, nothing weird, just a lowercase v, okay? This is your disjunction. And we talked about this as well in chapter 3, the disjunctive syllogism, right? Either or, pick one, not the other. That's our disjunction. It looks like this, P or Q. Again, give yourself some spaces. When you're writing out arguments, write them down this way and then put them on the form. Anyway, I'll go back and do that again. So the most fun one is the tilde, okay? And that's the key on your keyboard right underneath the escape key to the left of number 1, and it's a shift, okay? So shift, that top key, gives you the tilde, and it's a negation. It's opposite day, and it means not. We usually translate it not, or whatever form of no fits in that particular sentence. It's just a little not P, so John did not ride the bus. Okay, and then we have our conditional. That's 2 dashes and the greater than sign. Okay, that's how we make that. Now, you can use other kinds of arrows, but sometimes they do funny things to your spacing, so just keep it easy, okay? Conditional, and it's the if, then. Okay, so if P, then Q. If John rides the bus, then Mary rides the bus. Okay, so keep your P's always marking the same phrasing. Q's mark the same phrasing. Other ones we get to will mark the same phrasing, okay? The other thing is, when we're talking about truth values, let's not use that because that means something else now. Truth values, okay, were either true or false. You can't be both. And it makes a difference what order they're in and which symbol we use as to whether the whole statement is true. Okay, so it's a little bit interesting. We'll have some fun with that. Excuse me. So far. Now, one thing about the variables, okay, the symbols stay the same all the time. Use the same ones all the time. The letters can really be anything you want as long as you're using them consistently. Now, traditionally we use P's and Q's, okay? You ever hear mind your P's and Q's? This is where it comes from. And so in this chapter, and when we look at this for the different pieces, these are all 4. These are the only symbols you need, okay? Most of the time we will use P and Q. Sometimes Dr. Vaughn gives us other things to use, and that's okay. Whatever works for you so you can make sure that you're using them consistently, I don't care. Okay, I will use P's and Q's just so that you get the same thing all the time from me that you get in the book. Okay, not so horrible. I'm going to talk about each of the types individually and what their little truth tables look like, and then we'll be done with this section, but don't try to erase with your mouse, it's bad. Okay, so I'm on the bottom of page 252. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the conjunction. I think we picked this one because it's very straightforward and you don't really have to think about it. Okay,
The conjunction, of course, is and. And the conjunction is two simple statements joined by a connective to form a compound statement are known as conjunction. Each of the component statement is called a conjunct. We don't care. I don't care. Whatever works for you. Okay. And so when we're using this, we use P and Q because we have to put two things together. You can't just say and that's it. Okay. So these are possibilities. Okay. So the truth tables that we're going to work on, these are all of the possibilities for these two variables to interact with this particular symbol. Okay, and it's not so bad at the moment, and I'll show you some things. Okay, so when we're trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to make a truth table. I have my P and my Q; those are my variables. Okay, and then I have the statement that I'm going to look at is P and Q. Okay, and so we draw a line because those things are going to inform the rest of the truth table. Now, this is an easy thing at the moment, but I'm going to show you how this works. Okay, so when we have two variables, okay, well, let me back up. When we're looking at how big to make our truth table, okay, we want to make it as small as possible, but we also want to make sure we've covered all our bases, right? And there's a very simple way to make sure you've done that. Okay, I wish this was something that my logic teacher had given us from the beginning because I didn't get this. Anyway, so we get the P and Q, okay? So we have two truth values, true or false, right? That's always base 2. And then I have two variables, so I'm going to raise that to the second power, and that is only 4, okay? So it's truth values raised to the power of your variables, okay? The truth values is always 2. This changes depending upon how many variables we have. And our variables are the letters, okay? So we have to make sure P and Q. Now, I will tell you straight up, the most we will deal with is 3. If you think your argument or the argument from the book or the argument from something I give you has 5, think again. We only do 3. Hear that loud and clear, okay? So the other thing that's really easy to remember is how do we know how to set up? We have 4 rows, okay? How do we know what truth values to put there, okay? So this is something, and Dr. Juan doesn't do this, but this is the half and half rule. Okay, your first line, which is your P, is half of your rows. Okay, so half of the rows are true, and then half of the rows are false. When you get to your second variable, you're going to do half and half again. So in the Q, 1/4 of the rows are true, and 1/4 of the rows are false. Okay, so when I do this, and I do this the same way every time, P and Q, okay, so my P rows, I have 4 rows, so half my rows are true, and then half my rows are false. When I go to Q, 1/4 of my rows, so this one was 2 by 2, this one's 1 by 1, true, false, true, false. And the beauty of this is, if you do it the same way all the time, and you should, it will always look like this. And you will always have all of the possibilities for those 2 variables to interact with each other, okay? So when we're looking at my conjunction truth table, so my P's look like this, my Q's look like this, and then I'm going to go across and figure them out what their answer is, okay? So if I have a statement, and my first part of my statement is true, and the second part of the statement is true, then lo and behold, P and Q together are also true. Okay? Now, here's where it gets interesting. If any of the statements in my conjunction are false, the whole thing is false because we're anding. We're putting that together, and so they have to be the same on both sides, right? So true and false is false. False and true, also false. False and false, definitely false. Okay? So this truth table looks like this all the time. All the time. Every time you use it. Okay? If just one statement in the conjunction is false, the whole conjunction is false. Only if both conjuncts are true is the whole conjunction true. Okay? Not horrible. I'm going to leave part of this up here and erase part of it. I'm going to erase this and these. Okay. Now, when we're making the same thing, but for the disjunction, okay, a disjunction is two statements put together with a choice, right? Or. And sometimes we start with either for being very formal. Sometimes we just start, okay? And he gives us either Joan is angry or Anne is serene. Either Joan or Anne will now row the boat. Those things are P or Q. And when you look at it, you could say Joan is angry or Anne is serene. You don't have to have the either. It's nice when they give it to us. So anyway, so our disjunction, let's see if that's actually going to work. Maybe, hopefully you can see that. Disjunction, okay. It's the little V, P or Q. John rowed the boat. Sorry, rowed the boat, or Anne rowed the boat. Okay, how are we going to go? And we're going to do it the same way. Okay, so I have a P and a Q, and then I have my statement, P or Q. And it works the same way all the time. So I have 4 rows, and I have my half and half rule. So P is true, true, false, false. And Q is true, false, true, false. Now, with the or, it's kind of the most lenient one, right? As long as one of the disjuncts are true, the whole thing is true, okay? So true or true, way true. True or false is true, false or true is true, and the only time it's false is when it's false or false. So that's how that one works. Okay. Now, he does do a little bit of the, in English, or can mean one of these two or both of them, and that's the inclusive. And then there's the exclusive, where it really means just this one or this one. You can't have both, okay? And so this works out the same way. And on page 255, arguments we have known and loved. These are kind of the stock in trade arguments that work really well for lots of things. Okay. So whenever we have the P or Q, it always works like this, all the time, every time. Okay. Now, negation is a little bit different because, well, we're going to do it the same way, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of opposite day. Well, it actually is opposite day. So, you know, the negation is super simple, but also super simple to forget. Okay, so it's the tilde, not P. And so I only have one variable. Well, what do you do when you have 2 raised to the first power? It's just 2. Okay, so I'm going to have P, because that's a variable, and I'm going to have not P, which is my value here. If P is half and half, I have a true and I have a false. It's the only things it can be, right? a statement can only be either true or false. And if I'm going to negate these, so if P is true, then not P is false. If P is false, then not P is true. Okay? So it too looks the same way all the time, works the same way all the time. Follows the rules. And then our best one, all kinds of fun, is our conditional. Okay? Now, conditionals come in lots of formats, and so we've got a little cheat sheet kind of thing on the next page. So a conditional is that 2 dashes and a greater than sign on your keyboard, and it's the if P then Q. You can handwrite these always. Great, take a picture, trim in, it all works out. On page 257, we have a conditional. Again, we learned about these conditionals in chapter 3, and so a conditional has an antecedent, which is the first part, our P, and then it has an antecedent, sorry, it has a consequent, which is the second part, which is our Q. At least that's how it normally works. Okay? So again, we do the same thing. Okay? So I have P, Q, if P, then Q. Okay, that's my whole top line. Top line gets more and more complex as we get deeper into the chapter, so rejoice that we only have that little bit there. So again, I need 4 rows. I'm going to use my half and half rule and go true, true, false, false, and then true, false, true, false. Now, the conditional, as I said, is kind of weird because if P is true, then Q is true. That's very easy. If P is true and Q is false, then the whole statement is false. Okay? If P is false and Q is true, it's still okay. And if P is false and Q is false, it's still okay. Now, most days it makes total sense. Some days I just have to do the yes, sir, and just say this is the way it works. So the conditional is false in only one situation, when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. When you're talking about a conditional, okay, and you say if John rides the bus, then Anne will ride the bus. Okay? And if you say if Joe rides the bus is true, then Anne rides the bus. No, Anne didn't ride the bus. Well, that can't be right, so false. Now, if you aren't guaranteeing the first sentence, then it doesn't matter what the second sentence does, right? Because everything rests on that antecedent, okay? So if it's true, the consequent has to be true. If it's false, it doesn't matter what the consequent is. It's still a true statement because we didn't guarantee anything, so ta-da! That second one is the only time we have a little bit of a wiggle, so that's the only false one. Now, I've been doing this for a while, and I still make my little, sorry, I have 2 here, make my little 3x5 card that has the 4 on one side. There's nothing on the back. But it has all 4 of those little truth tables on here, so I can just look. I don't have to remember. I don't have to turn back in my book. I don't have to scroll on the ebook. I just made a little 3x5 card. I put copies of these up on, I think at the bottom of the first week. So, and if they're not there, poke me and I'll make sure they get there, okay? So, make a 3x5 card. It'll save your life. I use it as my bookmark for chapter 8, usually. Okay, so that's how those work. On page 258, you have a little bit, you have the review notes, and it gives you kind of a how to do these logical connectives and such. The other thing is words used in conditionals. And he only gives us 4 sets, but those are the ones that you will see over and over and over and over again. Okay. If introduces the antecedent, if then, right? Only if introduces the consequent. Oh, I did that right the first time. Okay. It only if introduces a consequent, which if you see that at the beginning, you've got to flip things, and we're going to look at that when we look at homework and such. Oh, I made the homework videos. I have at least one question from each of the exercises done in that video. Go watch those before you do your homework, okay? Provided introduces the antecedent, unless introduces the antecedent, and whenever introduces the antecedent, okay? So those are, wherever they show up in that sentence, that's what they're doing. Okay, so sometimes you have to start with your P and then Q, and you have to flip them for the actual structure. Okay, there's a few little examples there at the bottom of 258, and then we have the exercises for this section that start on 259 and go to 261. So, what's the piece? Oh, in exercise 8.5, you have these things that say, okay, take those letters that we used in the previous exercise and turn them into statements in English. Make it something obvious, like the dogs and alligators and all of that in the 8.3. Don't tell me, oh, John is happy and Mary is happy. Well, how would I know that's true and false? Okay. Or what I like is, okay, if today is Wednesday, that's my overarching piece there, then yesterday was Tuesday and tomorrow is Thursday and we're great. Okay. And you can make that all kinds of things. Okay. Anyway, so make sure you practice, do the homework, ask questions if you need to. You know how to get a hold of me. You have my email.